Welcome to our first presentation of the block of concurrent sessions. We also welcome the audience who is following us through our fan page. Please remember to mute your microphones and turn off the cameras during the presentation. We welcome Professor Thao Nguyen, Professor Sao Bui, and Professor Quynh Nguyen from VNU University of Languages and International Studies, who are presenting about localization in VSTEP listening comprehension test. We'd like to remind the audience, but to remind the presenters, to stick to the 20 minutes. At the end of the session, there will be 7 minutes for questions. You may start your presentation now.
Okay, so can I start now?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry that I cannot show my video because some problem with the setting. But I do hope that you will feel really enjoyable when you listen to my presentation and see the slide. So on behalf of our team from Vietnam, we are Quynh Nguyen, Sao Bui, and Thao Nguyen from University of Languages and International Studies, Vietnam National University. And we would like to deliver a presentation on the topic of localization in VSTEP listening comprehension test. So let me bring you some information about VSTEP. So VSTEP is a national Vietnamese standardized test of English proficiency, and we called VSTEP in short. It was officially used in the 11th of March in 2015, and VSTEP is claimed to be a standardized test because it's a national tool to measure the Vietnamese people's English capacity against standard of the Common European Framework of Reference and the Common European Framework of Reference in Vietnamese version. So as you see that, why it's called the standardized test? Because we base on the standards of the CEFR, and from that standard, we built up our national tool to evaluate the English language of the Vietnamese people. And also from that reason, VSTEP is called a locally produced test because VSTEP is made by the Vietnamese. Actually, it was developed by a group of a group of the testing task force from University of Languages and International Studies, where I'm working, and it is under the sponsorship of the National Projects of Languages 2020, and it's made for the Vietnamese. So VSTEP actually is a made in Vietnam test. So far, there have been 4 variants of VSTEP, and they're owned for the adult Vietnamese learners from 15 years old. The first one can be considered as the oldest child is VSTEP 325. It is a multi-level test that aims at level 3, equivalent to B1, to level 5, equivalent to C1. In Vietnamese framework, we have 6 levels from 1 to 6, and it will be equivalent to the CEFR from A1 to C2. And then we have VSTEP 2 that aims at level A2, and VSTEP 1, it is A1 based, and VSTEP 3, which is B1 based. So as you can see that VSTEP is actually a very young test with only 6 years of administration, and it's been under research because there are only a few studies on some topic like rating consistency, watchback effect, test validity, compatibility study between VSTEP and APTIS, a test organized by the British Council, and the kind of VSTEP overview or VSTEP panorama. And they're all done by the Vietnamese people. And that is some of the information about VSTEP. And now I would like to talk about some of the relationship between cultures and language. So as English teacher, we all know that there exists an indispensable link between cultures and language. It's meant language learning. So basically, language can reflect the cultures of the people who speak that language. And according to Thao in 2018 and 2009, they always go together, and they will have the mutual influence on each other. In terms of listening comprehension, cultures have unique communication patterns that restrict the effective listening as listeners are unaware of appropriate language patterns. Okay, according to Lustig and Coaster in 2010. And when we talk about like culture in second or foreign language learning, we often mention different kind of cultures. For example, the target cultures, which is the cultures of the language that we are studying. For example, if we are studying English, it's going to be the cultures of the English language, English-speaking countries like the US, UK, or Australia. And then the source culture, it will be, for example, if we have the Vietnamese people, so we can be the cultures of Vietnamese people. And international target culture can be considered as global culture. Um, so the reason why I mentioned the two things, the first one is VSTEP, and the second one is the cultural role in language learning, because I want to bring the rationale of our study. So for this study, we want to see, firstly, to validate the slogan that VSTEP promoted as a locally produced set, and it helped us to bring the fairness of the test that serve the needs of all the Vietnamese people who's learning English. And the second one, we also want to see the cultural role in language learning, as we have seen in previous studies. And because the conference theme is on listening skill, so altogether, we bring up with a topic for our presentation today, that is localization of VSTEP listening comprehension test. The focus will be on listening test and on VSTEP test, and we're going to want to evaluate the localization of the test. So, talk about localization. Localization in language test can refer to the schemata or schematic knowledge, that is organized background knowledge, which lead us to expect or predict aspect in our interpretation of discourse. And basically, they're not a kind of like clear definition of localization in language test, but it is said that localized matter is a sort of schematic knowledge. And when we talk about localized matter, we talk about culturally familiar components, according to Aptekin in 1981. So when test takers, they encounter the culturally familiar components, for example, the topics or the names or the places, or just the accent in listening or speaking skill, yeah, they will feel that they are very familiar with the test, and they can bring their own knowledge or prior knowledge into their test taking skill, and to a certain extent can help them to deal with the test at that moment. And talking about localization in VSTEP, according to Nguyen in 2020, in VSTEP, we consider both localization and internationalization. So the goal of VSTEP is to make the test suitable and appropriate for Vietnamese people while being aligned to international standards. So internationalization can be seen in the way that we align to international standards by following and adapting the CFR. However, as the goal of our test is to make the test suitable and appropriate for the Vietnamese people. We want to make it when we bring the ideas of culturally familiar components. And in that, in Miss Nguyen 2020's book, she mentioned the 4 aspects that we can make it context specific. Okay, so the first one is when we apply the CFR, we still consider to adapt that, to adjust that, to make it more familiar with the Vietnamese people by adding more topics, more setting. Yeah, that would be appropriate for the Vietnamese people. And then also when we're going to consider to adapt that, like we're going to aim at different groups of people. So as you can see, we have 4 variants of this step. Each variant will target one different group. Yeah, because based on our this analysis, before a while we develop the test, we see that each group of people will have their own needs. So we develop a test with different variant. Yeah. Also in the book, she mentioned that for context-specific peculiarities, we'll see like in our test bed, we try to make each of the skill or listening skill in particular that is very culturally familiar. But it's not only for Vietnamese people, but also for people from Asian country or from ASEAN. Yeah. And the last one is about the use of the test. So the test has been used, the test result have been used like nationwide throughout the country, and it is accepted in almost institutions across Vietnam. And talking about the previous studies on localization, we see there are two directions. When we talk about topic familiarities, so according to Long in 1990, there just like exist very like no significant difference of the statistical result when they have chance to like target the familiar and unfamiliar topics. However, for the later research by like a group of researchers like by Chance and Danko in 1992 or Smith and Reinhardt in 1994, and then the other researcher, they also show that there still exists a clear difference in terms of technical result when they have the chance to get used to the familiar cultural topic. So that is the point that I want to make it clear here. And you can see that in the previous study, they have shown that in terms of topic familiarity, it has some effect on the technical result. And that shows that in like most of the research, they base on the pre-test and the post-test with the student score. So before the course, the student have they took a test and they deal with very like unfamiliar topics. Yeah, and then after a period of study, they learn something about the topic and then they take another test, and the test score has been like increased. And also that can be seen through the teacher reflection. Yeah. So that's that's the only thing that I want to talk about the localization. And then now I will come into our study in detail. In terms of methodology, there are three research questions that we aimed to answer. The first one is that to what extent does the VSTEP listening test specification reflect the features of localization? So we focus on the test specification. The second one, what are the manifestations of localization of the VSTEP listening test shown in item writer's reflection? And the last one also about the manifestation of the test of the localization shown in the expert judgment. So to answer the three questions here, we're going to have the subject of the research. So for this test, based on the very small scale test, we're going to deliver our test, our study on the VSTEP 3 to 5 listening test only. So we focus only on one variant. So VSTEP 3 to 5 listening test lasts for about 40 minutes, include 7 minutes for answer transfer. There are three parts of the test. The first one with 8 questions include 8 announcement, instruction, or short dialogues, and they refer to like some like kind of very short information. And each announcement or each instruction will go with 1 question. In the second part, we have longer dialogue that include 12 questions with 3 dialogues. And in part 3, there will be 15 questions with 3 monologues. And they are all the longer dialogues or longer monologues. The number of items is 35 with all the multiple choice questions. And the target level is from 3 to level 5. Yeah, in terms of subject and method, as you can see from our research question, we have three kind of subjects to study on. The first one is the test spec. We're going to review what can be shown in the test spec for localization. The second one is the item writers. Three item writers involved in our study, and they provide the reflection by group discussion. And then the expert judgment. Three experts are going to judge 5 different tests on localization. And here comes with some of our result discussion. For the first research question, when we talk about the test spec, we see that there clearly exists the localization features here by the information that there should have at least one dialogue or one monologue in part 2 or part 3 of the test related to Asia, ASEAN, or Vietnam. And in the listening test, they can use, we can use accent of countries speaking English as the second language, like a Singapore or India, in one dialogue or monologue of part 2 and part 3. So in the test, there should be at least one dialogue or monologue in part 1 or in part 2, part 3 about the topic. And there's all the information mentioned about localization in our test spec. And now let's move to the second question. So what is seen in the item writers' reflection? So when the item writers get together and they share their opinion, they see that for localization, it can be seen through the way that they chose the topic and the content. That would be the topic related to Vietnam or ASEAN country, like a tourism, education, business, or entertainment. And they avoid the sensitive topics like a religion preference or politics. Basically, so far, there haven't been any like a monologue or dialogue about the two topics I mentioned on screen. In terms of cultural setting, they say that they created the familiarities, not necessarily the culturally related topics. So maybe in part 1, they add something like a place in Vietnam or a famous person from Vietnam or from Asian country that can bring some sense of familiarity to the test taker. However, it will not include any kind of cultural content to that. In terms of accent, they admitted that there are some tests that they have the Vietnamese people or Asian people, like from the Philippines or Singapore, who record the test. So these one are the item writer reflection, and we're going to see whether it matches with the expert judgment. So that is the thing that we can see in question number 3. For the expert judgment, based on the analysis, also summarize and see the 3 main points here. The first one, they evaluated the localized cultural contents that can be seen through some of the example here. So in part 2 and part 3 of the 5 tests, they have collected all the kind of information, the kind of topics that mention about a culturally specific, a context-specific content. For example, it can be high school in Japan, a pagoda in Thailand, or Vietnamese sandwich, which we call bánh mì, or the Vietnamese state related to the EU. Yeah, so the majority is belong to the Vietnamese culture. However, the test also includes something related to the Asian country, like Thailand or Malaysia, and the Asian countries like Japan. And secondly, they mentioned as the cultural setting. They also judged in part 1 that in part 1, with short announcement, instruction, or conversation, there just exists the cultural setting. Like with airport announcement at Tân Sơn Nhất Airport, it is an airport in Vietnam, or the Vietnamese coffee, or a Vietnamese famous artist or writer, or Vietnamese pottery village. Yeah, so basically they said that there only exists a kind of the name or places. It's not really the kind of cultural knowledge. And the listener don't need to have any kind of prior knowledge about the setting to understand the questions. In terms of accent, they say there are some recording with non-native accent speaking English as a second language, like a Singaporean. We recognize that is from Singapore. So in short, that can be seen that according to the expert, there are three main features of localization for VSTEP listening tests. The first one is localized cultural contents, and then cultural setting and accent. So based on the item writer reflection and the actor expert judgment, we can say that in terms of localization, it can be seen mostly via text in part 2 and part 3 of the test with cultural related content. And actually it can help bring ease or the familiarity for test taker while doing the test and gain some knowledge about different topics. However, there are little evidence of localization in part 1, like how they just have cultural setting rather than the localized content or cultural knowledge. And actually, this one reflects the requirement of the test spec. Now we come with the conclusion of the test. So because you can see that in the test spec, we just have a requirement that the localization should be seen in either part 2 or part 3 of the test. So in part 1, actually there's not many features of localization. But in part 3, the item writers, they try to add the cultural content for their study and that relate to Vietnam, to ASEAN countries or Asian country. So, and also the test helps us to deliver the message. Yeah, that this step is made for the Vietnamese and by the Vietnamese, and it is fair to the Vietnamese learners of English. As you can see that, as you can remember from the beginning of my study, when I talk about our study, when I talk about the reason why we have localization as a topic here, we want to validate our slogan of VSTEP, that VSTEP is made for the Vietnamese and VSTEP is fair to all the Vietnamese learners of English. And that is true based on the study of the result of this study. And it's true through the cultural content can be seen, which can be seen in several parts of the text, especially in part 2 and part 3, and can be seen through the different kind of like cultural knowledge that we may ask the test taker to bring while they listen to the test. If we can have some recommendation, we think that localization should refer to cultural content rather than only cultural setting. So if possible in the future for test design, the item should add more cultural content for part 1, for example, not only the cultural setting in the test. And talking about localization and internationalization, in terms of internationalization, VSTEP should consider internationalization in a way that we try to avoid target control specific issue with which we call high context culture. So why we try to maintain the localization? We also want to maintain internationalization because we want to make this step as a standardized step. However, we also want to avoid some kind of topic that can be, for example, that needs the test taker to have the specific understanding of the target culture, and they cannot like show up all of their listening ability because they don't have enough knowledge of that topic. Yeah. At the same time, for Vietnamese culture or localized culture like of Asian or ASEAN country, we also want to avoid the sensitive topic which I mentioned in advance, like a religion preference or the politics. Yeah, so that's all. That's been our presentation come to an end. And thank you very much for your attention. We'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. And the other reference of our study. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. We'd also like to thank you, the audience, for the attention. Our next presentation is extensive caption video viewing and L2 learning in young learners. If you want to switch room, remember you have 2 minutes to do so. And if you have any question, please leave it as a comment on the Facebook Live.
Yes, so the authors can answer them there. Due to time constraints, we are unable to answer the questions right now, but please feel free to leave any comments for the authors on our Facebook Live. So the presenter, the author, can please stop sharing your screen.
Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Quynh. It was really nice to get to see you again. Well, to hear you again.
Yeah, actually, Thao, yeah, Quynh, maybe she's listening.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so the next presentation on this blog is extensive caption video viewing and L2 learning in young learners by Professor Daniela Avello from the University of Barcelona. So if you would like to stay, you are welcome to do so, but please remain quiet in the meantime. And we welcome Professor Daniela, and we can start sharing your material if you like.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation, Captioned Video Viewing and L2 Learning in Young Learners. So my research study, My research study attempts to identify the optimal conditions for language learning through the use of multimodal input, specifically audiovisual input, considering input and learner-related factors. As for the theory behind viewing has to do with integration of text, sound, and imagery to foster comprehension and learning. Previous dual coding theory suggests that multimodal input is processed through different channels to create separate but interconnected representation. And here the outcome is better recall. Mayer claims that learning from words and pictures is better than words alone. It is very important to point out that our senses do not get overwhelmed by the combination of text and sound. Before moving to some of the research findings, it is important to point out a key concept. When videos have L2 sound and L1 subtitles, subtitles can be addressed as L1 subtitles or interlingual subtitles. When videos have L2 sound and L2 subtitles, subtitles can be addressed as L2 captions, L2 subtitles, or intralingual subtitles. I will mainly focus on the second one because my treatment focuses on the use of L2 captions with young learners. So in order to focus on young learners, even though the evidence is limited, research with preschoolers and primary school students has suggested that, for instance, older children learn more words than the younger ones in terms of receptive vocabulary knowledge. Overall, results seem to benefit older learners, and here is the explanation. Younger learner viewers seem to make a greater cognitive effort. However, it is very difficult to detach all the factors that interplay. First of all, L1 and L2 reading ability in the case of subtitled videos with young learners, and the amount of exposure to subtitled television and movies. Studies with children have shown that the amount of exposure to subtitled television and movies matters, which is difficult in dubbing countries, for example, here in Chile. When comparing L1 and L2 subtitles or L2 captions, there are different factors that should be considered so as to determine whether L1 or L2 subtitles are most suitable for each specific context. It is important to say that extensive research demonstrates that in most cases, subtitles and captions facilitate language learning. L1 subtitles are the norm in many countries, and the evidence suggests that they facilitate incidental learning, since they do not seem to distract learners from hearing the English words. So we can learn from both. But now the decision has to do with different factors, and this is something that I'm going to explain later. L1 subtitles are associated to comprehension and meaning, low proficiency learners, and leisure viewing. Whereas captions are associated to vocabulary learning and listening comprehension, since learners link oral and written representations. Overall, in terms of language gains, captions seem to be better than L1 subtitles, and at the same time, L1 subtitles are better than L2 audio only. But this is just something general. To make a decision, there are different factors that we have to take into account. And for example, L2 proficiency plays a role in here. Now, some of the arguments for captions, the strong presence for redundancy, since learners link oral and written representations. The learning of vocabulary and grammar. The fact that captions are useful to reduce learners' levels of anxiety by increasing their confidence in their ability to process the input. And the promotion of listening skills development and segmentation of L2 connected speech and oral word recognition. This is connected to the fact that captions foster the learning of grapheme, phoneme correspondence, especially in the case of languages that differ in terms of transparency. For example, here, Spanish and English. Students' exposure to the written form appears to be highly beneficial for low proficiency language learners. Research has also shown that L1 and L2 subtitles promote the development of reading skills. Students using captioned materials have shown significant improvement in reading comprehension, word recognition, decoding skills, and overall motivation to read. However, most studies have been conducted in ESL and L1 contexts. So this is why further research is required, and this is one of my main variables. And as mentioned earlier, when selecting audiovisual materials, there are different factors to consider. First of all, the appropriate selection according to learner characteristics. Favoring the use of clips from the same TV series, since they are repetitive, viewers become familiar with the characters and their catchphrases, as well as their plot. And in terms of content, here there is a very important question that we have to ask ourselves. Is it appropriate, interesting, or relevant for my age group? Is there enough visual support? And this is a question that is relevant when working with young learners. Can our students follow the captions or subtitles? And here, L1 and L2 reading speed is crucial. Research has shown that students who have a lower reading level, for instance, in the L1, even in the L1, show a tendency to disconnect while viewing. And it is very important that they pay attention while viewing. So this is something to consider. As for younger learners and poor readers, do not keep up reading the subtitles. So this is something that we have to pay attention to. After considering all the factors that I have mentioned and the literature review and the target learner characteristics, I decided to use 11 episodes of the cartoons Charlie and Lola. First of all, I pilot tested a single episode in grades 2 and 4 here in Chile, and the results were very positive. So I got positive outcomes in both year levels. And overall, these are the outcomes. Students did enjoy the experience. They showed high levels of comprehension, and there was a close relationship between comprehension and enjoyment. The few students who reported low levels of enjoyment were the same students who showed low levels of comprehension. In terms of language learning awareness, even though students reported that they had fun while viewing, they were not aware of the fact that viewing is a potential language learning activity. For them, it was just a filler, so they were not aware of their potential. Some of them were really concerned and they even asked, but we need to have classes, we need to attend our regular classes. So they were very concerned about the use of videos in the English class. After piloting the single episode to confirm that the TV series was appropriate and suitable for my context, the pandemic forced me to adapt everything to the new circumstances and move my research online. So that was quite challenging. First of all, I pilot tested the instruments and the treatment with 6 primary school students individually. So that allowed me to adapt everything and to work one-to-one to make decisions and to move everything online, which was a challenge, especially at the beginning. That was a learning process. So then I created a vocabulary test to discriminate those students who have a high level of vocabulary knowledge from the ones who have lower levels of vocabulary knowledge. When doing this, I worked with different groups from Chilean schools to pilot test the instrument. So after improving the testing procedures, I collected data at the end of the year, at the end of 2020. I collected data from a control group that was formed by 16 students who were subdivided into 3 small groups in order to control different variables. For example, whether their internet connection was working or not, that was something that was that had an impact on the way that we worked all together. So this is why it is very important to work with very small groups. So after improving the testing procedures and working with the control group, I was finally able to implement my actual research study, which is work in progress. So I started in March 2021 at a school here in Chile with 45 year 4 students and 45 year 5 students. At the beginning, I was able to administer all the instruments on site, so in person, but after depending on the weekly reports, after some students or some of the towns near the school were put in quarantine, I had to adapt everything again in order to learn to work with on-site and online students at the same time. In order to control for all variables, I decided to work with on-site and online students separately. So as for online students, I decided to work with small groups in order to control all the variables and ensure that they watched the videos and paid attention to them. And I worked with small groups between 4 and 6 students. As for the testing procedures, I tested the students in small groups from 1 to 6 students, depending on their availability during the English lessons or in the mornings, and their availability in the afternoons. The process has been quite slow because of that. So it is time consuming. From the research questions, the main variables explored in this research study can be identified. The language learning gains assessed in this study are individual vocabulary words, grammar constructions, and the development of receptive language skills. And here are the main variables that have been assessed or explored in this research study. Viewing distribution, that is to say shorter versus longer lags, the distance between the sessions, frequency of occurrence of the target language constructions in terms of repetitions, and the distribution of encounters, one versus multiple episodes. Learner characteristics, and the use of after viewing activities that focus on the target linguistic constructions. The other groups or subgroups used, I also used some after viewing activities, but they only focus on general comprehension after viewing the episodes. When working with year 4 students, they were subdivided into 3 groups in terms of the distribution of the sessions. Either they watched 2 episodes or 2 or 3 or 4 episodes a week, and the same as in year 5, but here I had the possibility to work with 2 big groups who were separated by watching 2 episodes or 4 episodes a week. This is because this was just because of the implementation that was decided by the school authorities. So in year 4, groups are smaller, and in year 5, according to the rooms availability, so those are practical issues, they decided to have 2 groups. This is my research design, which was divided into pre-tests, the treatment, which consisted of 11 episodes, and a post-viewing activity, the use of post-tests and delayed post-tests. So up to this moment, I'm here. In post-tests, I'm about to start with delayed post-tests. In the case of the students who had a treatment where they had to watch 4 episodes a week. But as I told you earlier, the process has been challenging and very slow. And this is why I can say that here I have some preliminary outcomes, which are mostly qualitative. When I sent my abstract to participate in this conference, I was confident that I was going to be able to present my preliminary results, but due to all the challenges, the process has been slow and time consuming. So this is why today I'm presenting preliminary outcomes, which are mostly qualitative. First of all, I can say that students have really enjoyed the treatment, and this is something that has also been quantified through surveys. And the preliminary results show that there was a significant improvement in terms of listening skills, reading speed, and meaning and word form recognition. But this is only focused on the instruments that I have been able to check up to this moment. I have a lot to do yet, but I would love to share the results with you in the future. In terms of comprehension, students showed high levels of comprehension. I expected high levels of frustration in the case of students who have a very low level of English, but multimodality has aided comprehension, and they were able to pay attention to the videos and they enjoyed the experience. And this is something that they have already reported. When observing their English lesson and after staying at school for a long time, about 3 months, I can tell that audiovisual materials are not necessarily used at school. And the data collected through a questionnaire sent to all the families confirm that their out-of-school exposure is poor. So therefore, there is a lot to do. There is still a lot to do. And this research study may be a contribution to promote the use of audiovisual materials in this context and in the Chilean context, because as we know, this is a dubbing country and we still need to do a lot to promote the use of audiovisual materials and to take advantage of the use of captioned video viewing. And I hope I can share all the results in the future with you, but I'm glad the treatment has worked and I have been able to implement my research study. Because at the beginning, I was really frustrated because due to the pandemic, I did not have the possibility of collecting data on site last year, but I have managed to do it this year, even though I have had to work with both on-site and online students at the same time. But this is all part of a learning process. And that's all. I would like to hear your questions so we can talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Daniela. So as for the audience now, we welcome you. We encourage you to turn on your cameras and open your microphones if you have a questions for the presenter. You can also use the hand reaction in Zoom or use the chat. Okay, so who is first? We have a lot of questions and also we have a lot of nice comments. So for the first question, Janice says, do you find a higher level of comprehension using cartoon videos versus non-cartoon videos? My question surrounds the higher level of body animation, body language.
After the administration of a survey at the end of the process or at the end of the treatment, the students said, or the participants said, that they liked the experience because they were able to integrate image and the language. So they can hear the language and they could read the subtitles, the L2 subtitles. So by integrating everything, they were able to understand. So their levels of they did not get frustrated. They were able to understand the main ideas, at least. Some of the teachers were really surprised because when they tried to do some activities, for example, listening activities, they got really frustrated. But they could see that when integrating audio and the text, okay, the audio, the text, and the images, students did not feel frustrated and they were able to complete the after viewing activities.
Thank you very much, Professor Daniela. Now we have another question by Michelle. She says, does 7 equal comprehension mean 7 participants in the group?
7 participants in each subgroup. So I worked with 45 participants, I would say 50, but after some of the inconvenience, I was able to work with 45 participants in total in each year level. So I have around 90 participants in total, but in each subgroup, for example, in year 4, I had to work with 3 subgroups because it was for A, for B, and for C. And this is something that was arranged by the school authorities. But then in each class, let's say for A, I was able to subdivide each class according to the after viewing activity. So this is why I said it was around 7 or 8 in each subgroup. So some students had to answer general questions, comprehension questions, which were written in Spanish, and whereas the other group had to answer some general comprehension questions in Spanish too, but some of the questions focused on vocabulary, or some of the questions focused on some of the grammar constructions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Professor Daniela, once again. And we have 3 questions from Graciela. The first one is, you mentioned there was a high level of comprehension. How did you measure comprehension? Do you think that comprehension happened due to the reading the viewing or the listening skill? And finally, could you explain more about the working memory pretest?
Okay, so yes, it is very difficult to tell what was the factor that could aid comprehension, but it was the integration of the three of the three components. But I measured comprehension with the after viewing activities because I included general comprehension questions. So they had to understand the video and important parts of the video that were not only present in the images, but they could answer the questions by reading or listening. But making a distinction between listening or reading is quite hard. Even though after the treatment, I asked the students, did you pay most attention to the subtitles, the image, or the audio? What helped you understand the videos? So they had to report that information. That was something that I asked them. I have to analyze that information. I have to quantify that information to be able to answer that question. So this is why it is work in progress.
Excellent. So I think we have time for one more question. Okay,
so I did not mention anything about working memory. So I used two tests to test phonological memory and complex working memory, but it was the digit span test.
Version.
Yes.
excellent. Thank you very much. Graciela says, thank you for your answer. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we would like to give special thanks to Professor Daniela for her very insightful and engaging presentation, and I am sure everyone here enjoyed it. And now we move on to the next presentation that will start in a few more minutes. The title of the next presentation for this room is Learner Control of Audio Video Control Buttons in Computer-Based L2 Listening. If you want to switch rooms, remember you have about 2 minutes to do so. Well, in this case, a little bit more, but please be prepared. You can check our website and our program to find the corresponding links and presentations. So, Professor Daniela, now you can stop sharing. Yes, you have done so. Okay, so we welcome Professor Mónica Cárdenas, who is the next presenter, along with Vera and Natalia Roldan. They can start preparing their materials in case that, well, they can start preparing.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Mónica, you let us know when you are ready to start presenting so that we can stop sharing the screen.
Okay, hi Dylan, good afternoon. I will be in charge of sharing the presentation, so I'm ready to share. Maybe you can let me know.
Yes,
I think we should wait.
I think we are 3 minutes ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's wait for a little bit.
We are admitting people because a lot of people want to be here.
Oh no, that's scary.
That's exciting.
Maybe you could start sharing, Natalia?
Okay, I will. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Should we start at 12:30 or would you like to wait until 12:33?
I don't know, Professor Cárdenas?
Just to be fair with all the other speakers, let's start at 12:30.
30.
12:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now.
Okay, so we are going to start now.
We welcome Professor Mónica Cárdenas-Claros from Pontificia Universidad Católica Valparaíso, Natalia Roldan from INACAP, and Vera from Universidad Técnica Federico Santa María. We'd like to remind the presenters to stick to the 20 minutes. At the end of the session, there will be 7 minutes for questions. You may start now.
Thank you, Manuel. Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you to all of you for your presence today. Mónica Cárdenas-Claros, Vera Saavedra, and me, Natalia Roldan Mora, are here to present about L2 listeners' control of ABC buttons and bars in call. This presentation will be divided into 4 sections. First, we will start with the constructs and the state of the art in which this investigation is based on. Then we will present the problem addressed. Afterwards, we will describe the research designed. And finally, we will report on the results and conclusions of this research. It is important to note that control buttons and bars are a staple of computer-based listening materials. This is a primary function of learner control because the opportunities for interactions are enhanced. Through interaction with rewind, repeat, pause, and forward buttons, learners obtain enhanced input to aid their comprehension. Consequently, these buttons are classified as compensatory help options as they help learners to recover from breakdowns in understanding. Based on second language principles, this type of help option addresses the principle of saliency, which is understood as increasing the probabilities of learners to notice relevant language features to improve comprehension. Specifically, the type of input enhancement achieved through ABC buttons is repetition. Thus, repetition makes input to be salient, which helps to compensate for comprehension problems, directs learners' attention to linguistic characteristics, and facilitate L2 processing. The current investigation is grounded in the results and findings of a meta-analysis conducted by this author. To this aim, a collection of 16 studies on learners' use of ABC buttons and bars and its relationship with listening comprehension were systematically assessed. These studies that range from 1994 and 2021 provided relevant information for further analysis. The data that was narrowed down by putting similar ideas together into broader categories and structuring them from more general to more specific topics. After this thorough analysis, two main categories and 4 themes were identified in order to answer the research question of this meta-synthesis. The first category, learners' use and gains of audio-video control buttons and bars, contained themes, listeners' strategies when interacting with audio-video control buttons, and effects of audio-video control buttons and bars on listening comprehension. The second category, challenges of using audio-video control buttons and bars, included themes, learner control variability according to proficiency level, and the need for training on the use of ABC buttons and bars. Although we identified information about the strategies that the students used, the positive effects on the use of ABC buttons and bars on listening comprehension, interaction variability according to proficiency level, and the need for training, we still do not know what prompts the students to use those ABC buttons. Therefore, this study aims to answer the following research question. What triggers high beginner listeners to interact with ABC buttons in a self-access computer-based listening environment?
All right, thank you, Natalia, for that introduction. Now I will be talking a little bit about our research design. So in the next slide, we can check some information about the participants of this study. This is a spin-off of a much larger study, which include more proficiency levels, but in this case, we took into account 11 pre-service EFL teachers from a Chilean university. 7 of them were female and 4 males. Their ages ranged between 18 and 24 years old. According to the Cambridge placement test results, they were put into beginner level English courses in this in their programs. And a shared background was that they lacked experience with computer-based listening or help options. In our next slide, we can check the data collection instruments that we used. First of all, we used an entry survey to get demographic info and to assess the familiarity these students had with computer-based listening context and help options. Then we used logs of system listener interactions. We recorded their screens using a program called Camtasia. And finally, we conducted semi-structured interviews. There were 6 in total per participant, 6 sessions in total, with a total amount of 66 interviews for the final corpus. In the next slide, we can check the name of the platform that we use, which is called Improve Your Listening Skills Platform. This platform has been designed based on the theoretical framework of help options proposed by Ms. Mónica Cárdenas. And it's a self-access teaching and research environment for L2 listening development. In the next slide, we can check what the platform looks like. As you can see, it's a very user-friendly interface. At the top of the screen, you can check all the help options, listening tips, technology notes, and etc. Each of the sessions or each of the talks had a loaded video here, which you can see in this black box on the left. And there were activities associated to this input, which were divided into pre, while, and post listening. For in the next slide, we can check the procedures that we used for students to interact with the platform. The first meeting was a group session in which students were able to see the interface of the platform, to get familiarized with it. We explained the different help options that they had. And once they started interacting individually with this platform, they had to undergo 6 individual sessions with 5 days of intervals and with no time constraints for them to interact with the platform. So there was also, they had the freedom to interact, to start wherever they wanted, meaning they could start with the post listening, and that would be fine as well. They would interact with the platform as they saw fit. And during these individual sessions, during the 6 individual sessions, participants had to interact with the input and exercises. They had to complete a listening questionnaire associated to vocabulary. And finally, they were interviewed by one of our group members after the interaction to check how they did and to ask them information about the steps to interact with the platform, the different help options that they use, etc. So in the next slide, we have the ABC buttons and bars, which is highlighted here. And this is the help option that we selected for the purpose of this piece of research. So we wanted to know how they use the ABC buttons and bars to complete, as we can check in the next slide, the session of while listening, which we call checking understanding. which was composed by multiple choice questions. And the results of this analysis of the interviews of their experiences are as follows. Ms. Cárdenas, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Of course. Okay, thank you, Jimmy, and sorry about that. Now, with regards to the results, and just to reinforce Jimmy's previous description, this study is a spin-off of a larger study that investigated input features that interfere with the comprehension of second language listening materials. So, second, please. So, this means that the participants did not exclusively interact with audio-video control buttons, but also with a range of other help options that were offered through the Improve Your Listening Skills platform. So, but for this study, or what we're going to be presenting today, we focus our analysis on the responses to do with the ABC buttons and bars. So for that, we did thematic analysis. We follow Miles Huberman and Saldaña's guidelines for doing thematic analysis, and to make sure that we were able to answer the research question, what triggered high beginner listeners to interact with ABC buttons, we coalesced, or we grouped the results into 3 themes. Natalia, could you please change the slide?
Yes.
Good. So here we have an overview of the results. I will explain each one of them and provide some sample data. As you can see in this table, the first theme, or the first reason that students use, that explains why students use those audio video control buttons is the need for addressing individual listeners' differences. And this theme is made up of 2 clusters: working memory limitations and on-task focus. This theme is defined as listeners' necessity to overcome comprehension breakdowns based on their individual differences. As you can see also, this theme was mentioned by a total of 5 different participants and in 5 different occasions. The second theme, the need for performance, which we define as the listener's necessity to comply with task requirements, is made by clusters task completion and correction, which were mentioned by 10 different participants, a total of 42 times. And the last theme that you can see in these tables, and which is called the need for second language listening development, and which we also define as listeners' necessity to advance or progress in listening comprehension, is made up by 2 clusters: text comprehension and listening reinforcement. So these clusters were identified 12 times by 4 participants and 4 times by 2 participants respectively. Now, to explain a bit of each of the clusters that make up each theme, we selected some sample data. So in the next slides, Natalia, we will display the findings using the same structure. So you will see the theme this cluster belongs to in the top right side of the slide. It has a T, T1, T2, or T3, right? Theme 1, theme 2, or theme 3, right? And then you will find the definition, some sample data, and again, the number of times that cluster was identified by the participants. So for instance, for cluster 1, the first theme, working memory limitations, Kathy in session 1 told us that she paused the video to ensure that the running audio would not bother her. Not doing this, in her opinion, may have affected her remembering the information she had heard. Next, Natalia, please. As for on-task focus, Flavia told us that she decided to play the video again to be more attentive. And similar reasons were posited by 3 other participants. Next. For task completion, which is a cluster of theme 2, we selected a quote by David, who after interacting for 3 sessions, he described how the use of ABC buttons allow him to select the option that best answered the question, and that's achieved task completion. Notice that this cluster was the most recurrently mentioned by the participants in this study. And I would like you to hold this piece of information till the end. Similarly, Natalia, please next. Similarly, Dylan, for cluster 2 of the second theme, correction, told us that instead of using the feedback feature, he played the audio again and relied on the ABC buttons to correct his initial selections. This reason was also mentioned by 2 other participants. Now, for the last cluster of theme 3, which is the need for listening development, we have text comprehension, which was defined as whether and how the use of ABC buttons facilitated the understanding of oral input. We have selected a quote from Sandra from session number 4, who described how repeated interaction with ABC buttons, in particular with the play button, help her comprehend the text. Next, and finally, with regards to listening reinforcement, the last cluster, Flavia noted that by playing the test several times, she was able to reinforce and focus much more on it, and this, in her view, aided listening development. This reason was also shared by 3 other participants. Now, next, please, Natalia. So now, to recap on the main points of the findings, please remember that, or maybe I didn't mention this at the beginning, we selected things that were mentioned, or we selected clusters, by the way, that were mentioned at least by 3 participants to be considered a cluster. Thus, the most recurrent reasons for using ABC buttons with this group of participants were task completion, task comprehension, and on-task focus. Well, although no other study has identified reasons for using ABC buttons with low proficiency learners, as it was mentioned by Natalia when she talked about the results of her metasynthesis, our analysis or our findings show that our findings align with the work of Hegelheimer and Tower 2004, Su 1994, and Tanchen and Lee, who have found that ABC buttons do help in task completion. Also, our findings that listeners use ABC buttons for test comprehension purposes align to the work of Kakmak and Erxet in 2017 and Russell 2011. Although we need to clarify that their focus was on strategies, not finding out reasons or what trigger second language listeners to use those ABC buttons. To this point, no study to our knowledge has reported the use of ABC buttons to aid on-task focus or making sure that students would be able to recover from breakdowns in understanding and distraction, right? Next, Natalia, please. As for limitations, we had issues with the quality of the data that we analyzed. Yes, we had 66 interviews, but as you could tell from the quotes that we showed you before, the data is a bit thin, right? The students were high beginner listeners with almost no experience with computer-based second language listening. So the reflections were as well a bit limited. What we're planning to do as a research team is to look at the interaction obtained, or the interaction data obtained through Camtasia, and we will assess the possibility to make connections of those patterns of interactions with ABC buttons with the reasons we have identified in the qualitative data. Also, we know that, we think that perhaps the participants take ABC buttons for granted and still they are unable to exploit their capabilities to use input repetition to their advantage. This point again, and that's why I enjoyed so much Phil Huber's presentation today about learner training. This points also to the need of learner training, where ABC buttons are shown as tools to aid comprehension, or where ABC buttons can be shown to be effective tools that can compensate for problems with short-term memory span, or that can be used as an opportunity for self-correction, as it was noted by the participants. Clearly, future works needs to explore ABC buttons and bars of listening to strengthen the body of literature that could inform future teaching practices. It would also be interesting to have studies conducted with language learners from other language backgrounds, and here is an invitation for the audience, to evidence how learners are experiencing and benefiting from input enhancement in the form of repetition. Also, we align to Russell 2011, who claims that quantity of interaction with ABC buttons and quality of comprehension needs to be further explored. Next, Natalia. As a final reflection, rather than a conclusion, we can insist that perhaps as audio control buttons or bars are a staple of computer-based listening materials, learner training on how to use them must be also a staple of environments in which learners are required to make use of that control. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Now we have some time for the Q&A session. So please feel free to turn on your cameras and open your microphone if you have a question for the presenter. As in previous sessions, you are free to use the reaction feature in Zoom or use the chat. We will be receiving questions from the fan page as well.
Catarina?
Thank you very much for the very enlightening presentation. I have one doubt, because I can see very clearly all the implication that this has for learner training, for teaching situations. But how much is there in this for language assessment? I wonder if increasingly, I don't know, big kind of language testing providers are looking into the possibility of giving students the possibility to, for example, rewind and repeat or something like that. I don't know if you've got any information about that. Thank you.
Actually, we have Quynh here, who is also a specialist on listening, because I am not familiar with any attempts or any possibilities that this is going to happen soon. We know that, and I don't want to make any claims about it, but we know that people from the testing field are a bit more reluctant to let listeners or test takers make use of that control. So well, yeah, that's what I would have to say about that question, Catarina. And it would be interesting, though, to make sure that if actually that learner control is given in testing situations, but I don't know how easy it would be to operationalize that. So yeah, I don't know if you, Jimmy or Natalia, have another reason.
Not really, I agree completely with you, Monica.
Camilo?
Oh, yes, sorry, I'm just making sure you could listen to me, yes? Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, because you said your participants had a lack of experience with computer-based listening or help options, how did you arrive to this characterization or corroborated that this was the case?
How did we arrive? Because we had an entry questionnaire, and in the entry questionnaire we had 3 parts, right? Where we talk, where we inquire about demographic information, we also had a session where we asked them to reflect and to tell us about their experience on with listening, first of all, and then with computer-based listening. And the responses that we had was that they mostly experienced watching YouTube videos. But if you think about the definition of computer-based listening, it's much more than watching, it's interacting with it, it's making use of those help options. And at the time, because this data was collected back in 2017, if I'm correct, 18, at the time, the concept, although I have been working with help options for 10 years, and there are some other scholars who have been looking at help options for more than 10 years, the students still claim that they do not have experience with computer-based listening. Yeah, they know how to play a video, they know how to rewind and forward, but they do not know the benefits of certain of those actions for their listening comprehension or for task completion, as we describe in the themes that we had identified.
Great, great. And one last question. I was thinking whether you found something interesting in the interview data that didn't make it into a cluster, because sometimes there are just, you know, exceptional occasions where there's something really interesting, but if we quantify it, then we just sort of maybe lose the depth there. Is there something that you can remember maybe from the top of your head? Oh, this is really, really interesting.
What I remember, but again, Natalia and Jimmy may be able to correct me here, is someone mentioning something about familiarity, right? Familiarity, that they use help options because they were familiar with those buttons, because well, of course, they watch YouTube videos, they have access to online resources, and they can work with them at their will, right? But yeah, we only found like one participant or two participants at the most who mentioned it. And as I mentioned before, the data was very thin with regards to audio video control buttons, right? So we really had to, you know, dissect without interfering with the data, right? Because we did not want to impose our conception about ABC button. So we only selected data where the students actually mention buttons, or mention played again, posted again, or forwarded again, and so on and so forth, which was kind of tricky, actually.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Camilo?
Thank you.
Any other question?
We have time for one or two more questions, I think.
Yep. Camilo has another question. Yes, or you forgot to?
Oh no, I maybe just a brief comment, because you talked about language assessment, and I think that one issue with allowing students to have access to all these features is that, well, to what extent that's actually something that happens in real life listening, where you can actually see that, well, listening tends to be more ephemeral, it's lost. But I would say that the more we have access to videos, or we start listening to electronic media, and we actually can manipulate, as you said, through the use of ABC buttons, then I would say we can make a compelling case to include that in listening tests. But one thing would be the correlation with real life interaction or listening, which tends to be, again, lost after you actually say something or listen to something. And yeah, probably that's one thing, in how to make conditions standard so that we have reliable results. But yeah, language assessment tends to be a very slow moving and a bit of a conservative field in that sense. Yeah.
I would say so. Yeah, but with regards to real life tasks, yeah, it's true that sometimes we may not be able to have a dictionary, we may not be able to have transcript, right? But for example, repetition, right? It's something that happens in real life conversations, right? If you don't understand, I use a number of clarification strategies to make sure that I understand your message. So I understand with all the other help options with audio video control buttons, yeah, it's true that you cannot tell the speaker or your interlocutor to go back or forward or something like that, but at least repetition or please slow down, you are speaking way too fast and so on and so forth. So I have.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yes.
So it cannot be talked as a general situation for all the help options, because that's why they are kind of, there are different types of them and they serve different purposes. And I think I've finished with this, right?
Okay,
thank you.
So thank you for a very engaging presentation. We would also like to thank the audience for the questions. And with the presentation, we finish our first block of presentations. Enjoy your lunch, and we will see you again today for the second part of the first day of the conference.